Ms. Janelle Moda-Stephen, Permanent Secretary of Ministry of External Affairs, International Trade, Civil Aviation, and Diaspora Affairs. Her Excellency Life Escalona Barrueta, Her Excellency Yanilis of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States in St. Lucia, Ms. Anya Sajo Singh, representative of the Embassy of the Federative Republic of Brazil in St. Lucia, Mr. Hirohito Takata, and Ms. Ayodele Hippolyte, and other representatives of JICA in St. Lucia, Mrs. Lisa Flora Montut, Director of the NCPC. Students, good afternoon. On behalf of the Ministry of External Affairs, International Trade, Civil Aviation, and Diaspora Affairs, it is an honor to welcome you to this session being held as part of Productivity Awareness Week 2025. This week's theme, Navigating Through Disruption, Resilience, the Engine of Productivity, is incredibly timely and immensely relevant. It highlights a powerful truth. True productivity doesn't just come from working harder or faster. It springs from our ability to bounce back, spark innovation, and discover fresh ways to adapt and thrive in the face of the changes and challenges that shape our world today. Let's dive in and explore how resilience can fuel our success. While Productivity Awareness Week is organized by the NCPC, the ministry is especially thrilled to be taking part in this exciting week of activities for the very first time. This collaboration offers a fantastic opportunity to align our external efforts with the national development agenda. After all, productivity in many ways is deeply influenced by how effectively we know value to this event. Your roles as future innovators, policymakers, and leaders are vital to advancing the mission of a more productive and resilient St. Lucia. Today's panel discussion, Redefining St. Lucia's Foreign Policy, Pursuing Greater South-South Cooperation, brings together a distinguished group of St. Lucian diplomats and experts whose experience and perspectives will help us examine how we can strengthen partnerships and reimagine our approach to international cooperation. Guiding today's conversation is our moderator, Mrs. Kinsey Brown. Mrs. Brown is a Foreign Service Officer within the Ministry of External Affairs, International Trade, Civil Aviation, and Diaspora Affairs. Employed with the ministry for the last 8 years, she has served in the capacity as Desk Officer for the geographic areas such as North America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and has also served as the ministry's focal point for the thematic areas of sustainable development and climate change. She holds an undergraduate degree in political science with international relations and a master's degree in development studies with a concentration in governance and public policy. For the latter, Mrs. Brown submitted a thesis entitled Conservative and Key Player in Negotiations for Development Initiatives, such as the 2019 visit of the United States Naval Ship Comfort Medical Mission and the 2022 donation of a 40-bed field hospital by the United States. She has also served as a member of St. Lucia's delegation for high-level intergovernmental meetings, such as the OECS Heads of Authority and the OAS General Assembly. Kinsey describes herself as being a loyal advocate for the pursuance of St. Lucian development on our terms, continuously emphasizing the importance of incorporating the historical experience and cultural nuances in discussions on development. Now, let us meet our distinguished panelists. Ambassador Earl Stephen Huntley is a retired St. Lucian diplomat with extensive experience in diplomacy, management, and media communications. He has held several senior positions in St. Lucia's Foreign Service, including serving as the country's first permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Nations in New York from 2001 to 2003, and as ambassador to CARICOM from 2003 to 2004. He later represented CARICOM in Haiti from 2007 to 2013, acquiring extensive expertise in international relations, development, and regional integration, particularly within the Eastern Caribbean. Beyond diplomacy, Ambassador Huntley is a respected writer and broadcaster, contributing significantly to regional media, publishing, and communication initiatives. Ms. Lisa Louis serves as the Economic Partnership Agreement, EPA, coordinator for St. Lucia, overseeing the coordination, monitoring, and evaluation of the CARIFORUM EU and CARIFORUM UK Economic Partnership Agreements. With more than 22 years of experience in international trade policy, regional integration, and project trade policy in the Ministry of Commerce. Her strong academic background in international affairs and development, international business law, and project management underpins her strategic leadership in shaping St. Lucia's external trade and integration agenda. Ambassador Charles Isaac is a seasoned St. Lucian diplomat, development consultant, and scholar with extensive experience in international relations, agriculture, and sustainable development. He currently serves as St. Lucia's ambassador to the Republic of Cuba, a position he first held from 2013 to 2017 and resumed in 2022. In this role, he has been instrumental in strengthening bilateral cooperation between St. Lucia and Cuba, expanding collaboration in health, education, and trade, and representing St. Lucia in regional and multilateral forums such as CARICOM, CELAC, ALBA, and GRULAC. A doctor of veterinary medicine by training, Ambassador Isaac also holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of the West Indies and is currently pursuing a PhD in political science and international relations at the University of Havana. He has served in several senior leadership roles within the government of St. Lucia, including Chief Agricultural Planning Officer, Chief Veterinary Officer, and Program Coordinator for the EU-funded Agricultural Diversification Program. Ambassador Isaac has led major national initiatives such as the Central Abattoir Project and climate resilience programs in agriculture. He remains committed to advancing South-South cooperation and promoting development grounded in Caribbean realities and self-reliance. Ambassador Julien Dubois, Ambassador for Diaspora Affairs, has had a distinguished career in diplomacy, migration management, and community development. He previously served as St. Lucia's Consul General in New York and as the grandchildren of St. Lucians born overseas. Beyond his international work, Ambassador Dubois remains deeply involved in the development of his hometown community of Labrie, serving on the boards of the Labrie Fishers and Consumers Cooperative, the Labrie Development Foundation, the Labrie Economic and Employment Forum, and the Labrie Cooperative Credit Union, one of the largest credit unions in the OECS. Ambassador Dubois' work embodies the spirit of cooperation, self-help, and humanitarian regard for others, reflecting the core values of St. Lucian culture, famously captured in the principle of Kudme. Aren't we lucky to have such an exceptional group of professionals with us today? Their extensive experience, valuable insights, and visionary ideas will surely enrich our discussion. As we reflect on today's theme, redefining St. Lucia's foreign policy, pursuing greater South-South cooperation, we are reminded that productivity extends far beyond nations that share our development realities and ambitions. St. Lucia is poised to carve out a brighter, more resilient, and sustainable future. A future where global collaboration sparks real, uplifting progress for all of our people. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Good afternoon, audience. Good afternoon, audience, virtual and in person. Good afternoon, students of Community College. This afternoon promises to be a very engaging panel discussion. Now, I want you to be very attentive because we have a few prizes up for grabs at the end of the panel discussion. We have Miss Maria Jean-Baptiste. Maria, give us a wave, please. Maria is in the back. And throughout the panel discussion, Maria will be coming up with 4 questions based on what our panelists say. And the lucky respondent who responds correctly, you will be the beneficiary or the recipient of a prize courtesy of the members of the Diplomatic Corps. So we'd be grateful and thankful if you pay very close attention to what is being said this afternoon. So definitely we interact with the world. And, of course, what we prioritize during these interactions. In order to understand the work that the Foreign Ministry does, it is very important that we first introduce you to the ideological considerations that guide all of our efforts. This will be done in 4 segments. In the first segment, we will look at where we were and where we are now in terms of our foreign policy. We will look at making a case for South-South cooperation. In the third segment, we will examine the role of the diaspora and, of course, their importance as an untapped resource. And lastly, we will look at maintaining relations with traditional partners while courting new ones. So heading first into the first segment, which we will title Defining St. Lucia's Foreign Policy, where were we then, where are we now? I will provide some context for those in our audience who may not be too familiar with foreign policy. Alliances throughout history have been part and parcel of a state's survival, particularly in the case of small island developing states such as St. Lucia, with inherent vulnerabilities such as limited physical resources and susceptibility to exogenous shocks such as financial crises. Given the important role of the Ministry of External Affairs in mobilizing external resources, it is important that our foreign policy remain malleable, able to address new challenges as they emerge. Foreign policy is supposed to be dynamic, evolving in tandem with an ever-changing geopolitical environment. Now, over the last 2 decades, we have witnessed a gradual decline in hegemonic authority of traditional players such as the United States of America. We have seen the emergence of new players, such as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, or what we know as the BRICS. And of course, we've seen the emergence of Africa as a global powerhouse. Now, I believe St. Lucia has responded accordingly, with deepened relations with countries such as Nigeria. The recent visit of His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, was a public declaration of St. Lucia's foreign policy trajectory. That being said, I will direct my first question to Ambassador Huntley. So, Ambassador Huntley, drawing on your extensive experience within the Foreign Service, can you give insight as to how St. Lucian foreign policy has changed over the years? How did the visit of President Tinubu and other foreign policy decisions signal a departure from what existed in post-independent St. Lucia?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this discussion. I see St. Lucia's foreign policy in 3 distinct phases. The first one from 1979 to 1996, that's immediate independence. And I've given that period a title which will explain how we got to where we are today. I call it no posturing on the international stage. And that came from Sir John Compton, our first Prime Minister, a couple of days before independence. At a press conference, he was asked, what would our foreign policy be? And he said, we will not posture on the international stage. 1979, at that time, was the period of the Cold War. The Cold War, for those of you who may not know, was a period of intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union for influence in the world. So there were some points where it was not cold, like the Vietnam War, for example, which the US lost, and a lot of other conflicts. But by and large, it was a competition for influence. So you find that the Soviet Union had a lot of influence in Eastern Europe, some places in Africa and Asia, the US in the Western Hemisphere. And they were competing also for influence with countries that were just becoming independent. So it was in that context that St. Lucia became independent. We were in the Western Hemisphere under US influence. So Sir John's position is that we were not going to posture, meaning we would not be making major statements, major foreign policy shifts on the international stage. And so in that first period, St. Lucia had a policy of remaining with what I call is traditional allies. So our main relations with the US, with Canada, with the UK, as you could. But he focused on the traditional countries. So you'd find during that period, a lot of projects were funded by Canada, the US through USAID. And although, as I said, it was the period of the Cold War and we were not supposed to be posturing on the international stage, St. Lucia could not escape the effects of the Cold War. And the Cold War came here in the Caribbean in the Grenada Revolution. The Grenada Revolution and the Grenada Intervention, which in fact forced us to take a position. As you know, the Grenada Revolution happened in March of 1979, a couple of months before our own, not a couple of months, a month after our own independence, but a couple of months before general elections in St. Lucia at that time. And when the Grenada Revolution happened, St. Lucia and other countries, it's feedback from somewhere, had to take a position. And the position of the St. Lucia government and a lot of the other countries at the time was that they did not want the example of the Grenada Revolution to influence politics in the other countries. And so they resisted the Grenada Revolution at the beginning. But with, what would I say, diplomacy from Maurice Bishop and others, they came to accept the Grenada Revolution. And so when Maurice Bishop was overthrown and assassinated, those St. Lucia and those countries had to take a position as to what they were going to do. And there's a big debate internationally. As you know, the US intervened in Grenada to put down what was a counter coup. And there has been a debate as to whether the US intervened on its own or whether the OECD called a counter coup, because they didn't want, first of all, they had been the first coup with Gary and Maurice Bishop, and with that administration being violently overthrown the way that it was an example that they did not want to be followed. So they did invite the US to intervene. I remember Mr. Compton saying that if he had a choice of another country, he would have chosen another country. He wasn't very happy with the US. But the US came in, and the revolution, in a sense, was I wouldn't say restored, but the counter coup was stopped, and Grenada returned to normal relations within the OECS. At the same time, St. Lucia's foreign policy was also concentrated on regional integration. At independence, it was understood, it was realized that as small countries, we had to coordinate our foreign policy. And in fact, the OECS was established in 1981 as a mechanism for diplomatic representation overseas. So you would find between 79 and 81, 82, we had joint missions in the UK. We had a joint mission in Ottawa in Canada. And there was supposed to have been like a foreign policy coordination unit within the OECS. So foreign policy coordination within the OECS, within the sub-region, was another aspect of our foreign policy. There was one other, I don't know how much time I have, there was one other factor in the Cold War that I must bring to your attention. It wasn't just Grenada. Some of you may have heard of the Iran-Contra affair. The Iran-Contra affair in the US in 85, 86 was under President Reagan, where the United States was selling weapons to Iran, counter US policy. And the proceeds from those weapon sales were being used to buy arms to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, who were opposed to the left-wing Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. St. Lucia had a role in this because it turned out that there was an airline based in St. Lucia called St. Lucia Airways. St. Lucia Airways did some regional work, air services there, but St. Lucia Airways had one or two Boeing aircraft, and St. Lucia Airways was being used to transport the arms to Nicaragua. Okay. So while Mr. Compton had said that we wouldn't posture on the international stage, it was very difficult not to do that. The second stage of our foreign policy I want to bring to your attention is from 1997 to 2007, which is what I call the period of the China factor. We established relations with the Republic of China, Taiwan, in 1984. And remember, as I said, in the first stage, our relations with our traditional friends, the US, the UK, etc. And so we hardly established relations with any communist countries in the first phase of our post-independence foreign policy. We established relations with Taiwan in 1984, and it was part of a move by the John Compton government at the time to try to attract investment from that part of the world, particularly in Hong Kong. I remember he made a trip to Taiwan, South Korea, and Hong Kong in 1985. In 1997, when the government was changed, when the Central Labour Party came into power, the then Foreign Minister, George Odlum, took a different tack. He had discussions with the ambassador of China, the People's Republic of China, at the UN, where he had been ambassador to the UN. And in August of 1997, Prime Minister Kenny Anthony announced that St. Lucia would be changing relations with Taiwan, and going to China. At the time, Taiwan had a very small embassy here, and they were involved more in technical cooperation in agriculture. We switched to People's Republic of China in September 1st, 1997, and in doing so, we had an agreement, an economic partnership agreement with China, where there's supposed to be four big projects. One was the stadium, the second was a cultural center, which was not built. The third was supposed to have been a hospital, a modern hospital. And the fourth was the free trade zone in Beaufort. As I said, two or three of these projects were not built. And fast forward to 2006, the government changed. The United Workers' Party and the Sir John Compton returned. And the new foreign minister, Rufus Busquet, switched again. So we went from the People's Republic of China back to Taiwan. And there are stories as to, in each case, there are background stories as to how those changes happened, which I suppose will come out at some other point in another forum, but very, very interesting stories as to how those changes were made. So the period 1997 to 2007 sees what I call a more radical shift in our foreign policy. We are starting to expand into new areas, China, People's Republic of Taiwan. And then we have what I would call the present phase of 2001 to now, where we have expanded our relations considerably. We probably have relations with about 140-something countries, countries all over the world, but of importance, countries in Africa, where we didn't have relations with countries in Africa in the first phase, immediate post-phase, post-independence. So we have relations with countries in Eastern Europe. We have relations with countries in Africa, as I said, in Asia, all over the world. So we have expanded our foreign policy in terms of our diplomatic relations. And the final thing I would say is that in this expansion, you would note that we are having relations with countries in the Middle East. So you'll recall that there's a loan from the Saudi Development Fund to complete St. Jude. There's a loan from the Kuwaiti Fund for the Sir Julian Hunt Highway. So we have, in this new phase, we are definitely going into new areas. And then with the visit of the President of Nigeria, we are definitely making a thrust towards Africa. The final thing I will say about Africa, we have had relations with one African country, Morocco, from 2011 or 2008. And again, there's an interesting story in that in 1997, there was a revolutionary movement in the Western Sahara, which Morocco claimed. And we established relations with the Sahrawi People's Republic in 1997, soon after independence. And that again was done by Foreign Minister George Odlum, because that part of what is now Morocco has a lot of phosphate, and the hope was that in recognition, with recognizing Sahrawi People's Republic and establishing relations, we could have benefited from that. But now Morocco, we now have relations with Morocco, ending our relations with Sahrawi People's Republic in 2007. But the thrust now is towards Africa and towards more countries in the south, with Brazil, for example. We are having trade agreements. So our foreign policy has shifted from a very conservative approach in 1997 to a more expansive foreign policy. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for taking us on that journey through St. Lucia's foreign policy, Ambassador Huntley. Because certainly when we look at the literature or just in conversation, we do see the different transitions. In the period, in the immediate post-independence period in St. Lucia, in our foreign policy, there was almost an attempt to keep in line with the status quo that existed pre-independence. As we move forward, we see a transition towards an attempt to shed the institutional memory left behind by the colonial legacy. And for instance, during the George Odlum era, I believe Rat Island would have been the site of many high-level political meetings of some of the most renowned political minds in the region. So for instance, Morris Bishop and a few others, they were said to have engaged in a few secretive meetings on Rat Island to discuss the different revolutions or counter-colonial measures that they plan to execute throughout the region. So at this point, I would like to invite the other panelists. We can start with Ambassador Isaac in Cuba to just chime in on what Ambassador Huntley would have said. Ambassador Isaac, the floor is yours.
Yes. Yeah, I had some challenge in actually hearing what was being said earlier on. Essentially, one has to understand the concept of South-South cooperation from a historical perspective. You know, the Global South, as is referred to, essentially represents a group of countries that were previously colonized by Europe and, of course, to a lesser extent, the United States, where, of course, the resources were, you know, exploited to the max until there was, of course, political independence. Some countries actually had to go into, you know, significant struggles, right, to achieve this. While they acquired independence, the political and economic structures that allowed for the metropoles to exploit them continued to exist. And so the global systems that essentially, right, were created to foster the exploitation of those countries, right, represented a major obstacle to their development and to facilitate the development of the livelihoods of the peoples. As such, the leaders of those countries, right, it became clear to them, right, of the need to find alternative means at which they can address the problems. On top of this, of course, there were institutions like the IMF and the World Bank that was supposed to have assisted in terms of making capital available for development. which essentially led to an accumulation of a crisis of debt that essentially is becoming more and more difficult to be paid, right? So that, the continued struggle of those countries for true independence or an interdependence that allows for the growth of their people, right, has basically translated to what we refer to as the BRICS group of countries, initiated by, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and Brazil. Today, BRICS essentially has grown and is growing very, very rapidly, at a pace that most of us would not have anticipated. However, because of the acuteness of the difficulties in terms of the challenges those countries confronted, given the fact that the concentration of capital has given rise to greater inequalities, greater difficulties in those respective countries. This has led to the creation of new institutions. For example, the BRICS Bank, right, that essentially offers or is intended to offer, right, opportunities, right, which are more conducive to, right, the developing countries, and as such, right, there is a greater possibility of, right, development initiatives being successful. Having said all of this, though, in terms of the general historical context, right, the concept of South-South cooperation is really intended to consolidate, right, a kind of solidarity that is based on exchange of science and technology, based on, right, facilitating, right, the trade relationships that is more equitable, and also based on facilitating the use of alternative means of exchange. As most of you would have been aware, that the predominant currency used for trade internationally has been the US dollar, right, since the 1940s. This has grown to become a problem because, in a large measure, the US has weaponized this as it applies sanctions against countries such as Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and a number of countries in the world, right, that from their perspective is not in line with their political, ideological position or possibly economic position, right? And as such, right, those countries are subjected to extreme difficulties. And I can speak to Cuba in a large way because Cuba essentially operates in a continuous crisis or perpetual crisis because of the impact of the economic embargo and the designation of Cuba as a country that, promotes terrorism, right? State sponsor of terrorism, as it's referred to. So, in a nutshell, the necessity for the South-South cooperation, right, has become one that essentially would have fostered, right, the development of the countries of the South, coming out of the yoke of colonialism and inheriting structures that was not intended to foster the development. This is work in progress. There are a lot of initiatives, and of course, the UN has played a meaningful role as far as facilitating that process is concerned. There is an Office of South-South Cooperation that is part of the UN system that is focused on fostering the development of South-South cooperation. But as I indicated earlier on, the most impactful moment, right, of the manifestation of South-South cooperation is beginning to demonstrate, right, as a result of the consolidation of the BRICS, right, that seem to be at this point in time the principal medium by which there is a strong likelihood, right, that the countries of the developing South would have a fair chance, right, of realizing the dreams of its peoples, which is a better livelihood for all.
Thank you for that, Dr. Isaac. So, Ambassador Dubois, the floor is yours. Any comments on what your fellow panelists have said?
Okay, thanks much, Mrs. Brown. Pleasant good day to panelists, to the audience, both online and in person. My memory of that era, particularly just post-independence, I recall, obviously, the UK being our more or less parent country would have been one of the first to have had diplomatic relations with us. But I remember among the first was Venezuela. And probably you could speak to us a little on this. I remember there was some developments, particularly around View Fort, with regards to some of the projects they pursued when they came in.
Yes, in fact, Venezuela was one of our early friends. Mr. Compton had a personal relationship with the Venezuelan foreign minister at the time, Calmani. And it was through Venezuela that the boxing plant in Guinea was established. We also had a memorandum of understanding with Venezuela on air services, which was something I had negotiated, by the way. And Liat used to go to Venezuela a couple of times a week, especially to Margarita, because there was a lot of shopping by vendors here going to Margarita to shop. So relations with Venezuela were very, very close. In fact, there was Ambassador Molinero. He was the one who pushed very hard, Venezuela's first ambassador to St. Lucia. He was the one who told us about Jean-Baptiste Bido and showed us the connection between Bido and Venezuela. So you are correct. In those first early years, we were very close to Venezuela. And again, the government in Venezuela at the time, Perez, Galvani, were more what we'd call right-wing governments as compared to what is there now, and would have been natural allies with John Compton, given again, as you say, our traditional relations with the UK and Canada. So those relations with Venezuela were in line with the rest of our foreign policy at the time.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Louis, before we open the floor for questions, any comments from you?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you to Ambassador for that history. I cannot say that I recall, but my knowledge on the evolution of our foreign policies is simply based on research and reading. I want to zero in on the visit of Nigeria and on the Nigerian president, and to signal that it represented more than diplomacy. I feel it also signaled St. Lucia's desire to pivot, to a more broader and more assertive foreign policy identity. We've recognized the need for diversifying our options for international cooperation, and so the bold move to pursue partnerships with countries in Africa, I think, should be lauded, and we welcome it. And yes, that is my comment on.
Thank you for that. At this point, we'll open the floor for questions. Any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Any questions? Okay, so at this point, we will go into the second segment, which is entitled Making the Case for South-South Cooperation. So to give you some context, St. Lucia has long benefited from South-South cooperation. Though the term is one that may not have been given as great visibility as it currently enjoys, South-South cooperation is definitely something that St. Lucia has actively practiced. Some of the arguments for pursuing South-South of Morocco: we have been the beneficiary of fertilizers for farmers, scholarships, and technical training. Through the Republic of India's Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, numerous officials in the fields of health and agriculture have benefited from knowledge sharing, and of course, through our perhaps most well-known South-South ally, the Republic of Cuba, we have benefited from the Cuban medical scholarships. There have been instances where the ministry has shared details of incoming development assistance, and onlookers tend to comment on the difference in the nature of the assistance coming from the global south as opposed to the global north. With the Global South, you would note that there is a heavy emphasis on knowledge sharing and technical assistance, and you may not necessarily witness a high level of financial inputs or cash donation, so to speak. So there is always a debate as to which one is better. So at this point, I would like to ask Ambassador Isaac to respond. Ambassador Isaac, over to you.
Essentially, as I indicated earlier on, there is a historical context within which, right, it has become obvious that South-South cooperation's community, global community, especially developed countries, has basically provided a significant number of scholarships, right, to those countries in the South. St. Lucia alone, for example, we have received over 800 scholarships, and over 800 professionals have actually qualified in various fields, most of which in medicine or medical related fields, but in agriculture, in engineering, right, in sports, right, and a number of other areas, including economics. Cuba, besides this, offers, right, provides today as we speak, right, extensive support to our medical institutions in St. Lucia and throughout the Caribbean. To the extent where, we are actually, right, basically our health system basically depends on a large measure, right, on the participation of Cuban professionals. And this, as I said, is not just unique to St. Lucia. It is basically throughout the Caribbean and the wider global South. But more than this, notwithstanding the extreme difficulty that Cuba is confronted with, right, the technical assistance and support that they provide, right, is extremely valuable in terms of cost. If you want to ascribe a value, right, it is extremely valuable in terms of, the amount of monies that would have been injected in providing that kind of support. But as I said earlier on, there is the emergence of the BRICS, and there is the emergence of the BRICS Bank. That is essentially an institution intended, right, to provide financial support to developing countries, right, under very favorable conditions. Favorable, as in terms of, right, the variation from the extreme conditionalities associated with finance from the World Bank and from the IMF, where extreme conditionalities are required as prerequisites for getting monies that you would need to foster development initiatives. So that in my mind, right, okay, having gone through, right, similar historical experiences, right, some countries would have developed at a faster rate than another. A lot of the countries have the similar geographical, right, climatic conditions, experience similar socioeconomic pressures, right, based on the global economic systems, right. The spirit of solidarity becomes a fundamental condition that allows them to recognize the need to share, right, the wealth of experience, knowledge, technology that they would have developed to benefit, right, each other. And as such, I think that, while all these countries are burdened with the debt crisis that they're confronted with, that impacts significantly on the availability of funds for development otherwise, right? The continued development must of necessity, right, be focused at finding alternatives, right, alternative means of solving the issues of the development of the peoples. And I think working together, developing, applying the principle of interrelationship, I think to my mind is, right, the way forward, right? Because obviously the Western world has demonstrated historically that they cannot be relied upon, right, to foster the development. The whole system has been one of exploiting the resources of the South. And based on that historical experience, it does make sense as a manifestation of wisdom to adopt an approach where we can share the wealth of experience, knowledge, and science and technology to allow for, right, the better future or sustainable development of our people.
Thank you, Ambassador Isaac. Panelists, any contributions?
Just to add something you raised about the South in terms of the conditions that you would get from the South in relation to development assistance, economic aid, financial assistance, they are different. They are better than what we would be getting from our traditional Western allies. Just take, for example, the loan for the hospital. The conditions you would not have got from traditional Western friends. In addition to that, we are going through a period of great turbulence in international relations. You're seeing what is happening in the US, where the US President Trump is saying, make America great again, but America is for Americans. Right? So don't expect to get the kind of relationships that we had post-independence with those countries now. So you have to turn to your brothers and sisters in the South.
I want to add as well that while we value tremendously South-South cooperation, it doesn't mean that we're turning away from the traditional source of support that we have had. There's value in incorporating both. We need options. We are broadening our options, for for access to development cooperation and development support. So I do not want the takeaway to be that we value South-South cooperation at the detriment of traditional aid, which is the North-South cooperation. We need both, particularly when we experience the shocks, the climate shocks, disaster, and so on. We want to be able to have those options where perhaps North-South cooperation can plug a hole, can fill the gap where South-South cooperation is not able to provide all that assistance. Also, there's not a lull in the cooperation or the support that we would need as well. So we need both. We find value in South-South because we share the same vulnerabilities, we have the same challenges, the same concerns, but we also need to have North-South. And also, there's what we call the triangular approach to cooperation as well, which is just as valuable.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. What I would like to hear, we're looking to compare traditional aid, monetary value, as compared to in-kind kind of arrangements. But my question is it that we have not valued or placed a value? So, for example, it started that we probably got about 253 tertiary level scholarships last year for 2024. Has an actual value been placed on this? We speak to, when we in budgetary preparations, to grants and contributions. Is it considered to be part of this? Is it that we're not speaking about it, placing it on the table, on the floor, so to speak, adequately, that we could actually appreciate the value of the South-South in-kind kind of support that we get?
That is a very good point, Ambassador Dubois. So at this point, just to highlight that efforts are being made by the Ministry of External Affairs to assign a value or give a monetary value to the incoming scholarships. Presently, we're giving an estimated average for both undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships. So hopefully in the next budget cycle, that is something you see reflected. So before I open the floor for questions, I just wanted to comment, and in terms of the technical assistance we see coming from the South, from my perspective, that is nearly non-negotiable. You need capacity building. You need technical assistance, particularly when we speak of skills development, because without having your human resource trained in the skills they need to maintain the incoming development assistance or maintain ongoing projects, you as a nation will never have ownership of your development. You'll not have ownership of these development projects. Yeah? So any level of autonomy or sovereignty, without that level of human resource capacity building, it is unattainable, essentially. Any questions from the floor? Yes, you can come to the mic. Just introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Jada Esteva. I'm a year one student doing CAPE at SAFA, pursuing history, sociology, and law. And my question to you panelists is, in relating to the loans that we got from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, I just wanted to know, what are they, as Middle Eastern nations, what are they gaining from St. Lucia? Like, how are they benefiting from this? We have a loan from them, but how are they benefiting from this? And also, what's the backup plan in the event that some of our relationships with these traditional nations or these people who are helping us, if they go south, no pun intended? What is the backup plan for that? How is St. Lucia going to stand? How is St. Lucia going to keep thriving? And our economy is going to keep benefiting from this?
Panelists, I think you have them a little scared, eh? But
Yeah. When countries give loans on soft conditions like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, it's just part of the foreign policy where they try to make friends. They don't necessarily expect something back from you, but you're expanding your relations with countries, you're establishing good neighborly relationships, and if you're able to do it, important compared to what we have been getting traditionally. A loan from the IMF would not come under those kinds of conditions. In fact, traditionally, IMF assistance to countries has come at a great cost to some of those countries in terms of economic, the social impact of IMF conditions. So it is not that Saudi Arabia or any of them are expecting us to pay them back something more than what they have given. It is a matter of good relations in your foreign policy. It's just like Cuba. I mean, you're talking about quantifying the amount of, if we had to quantify the amount of assistance Cuba has given to St. Lucia alone from 79 when it became independent, even before independence, I think they were giving scholarships to the St. Lucia Labour Party. If you were to quantify what Cuba has done for St. Lucia alone, and they have done that all over the world, you ask yourself, what are they getting back from it?
Okay. Yeah. So, in other words, this was all in good faith and we don't have to walk on eggshells?
No.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for answering my question.
very good question. Give her a round of applause.
In international cooperation, it helps us solve our joint problems and also helps us to avoid conflict. My question is a practical one. So working in a Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well, you know, resources are always constrained. With the St. Lucia's expansion in international relations and desire to pursue South-South cooperation, how do you see this being pursued through a practical standpoint? Is it through traditional bilateral relationships, for example, opening up more embassies in different parts of the world? Is it through the multilateral system, which I'm also a big believer in, having also previously been based in New York at the United Nations? Is it
combination of all, combination of all, precisely because we are a very small state with limited resources. So the multilateral avenue, for example, our mission at the UN is key into that. So we would use that. We would also use bilateral, as I said, all three of them. So for example, if we were to set up an embassy, which we would have to do in one of the African countries, if we want to expand relations, that would be accredited to more than one country. So we would not be restricted to want to pursue an expanded foreign policy.
I can add as well, we also use our trade agreements. We have the economic partnership with the United Kingdom. That agreement has specific provisions on development cooperation. I will speak a little bit more on how we can leverage that agreement, but of course we can go through, and the discussion in terms of what type of cooperation support we need and the priorities that we have, but also our partners, our traditional partners.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Joy Lord. I am a postgraduate student and I'm currently interning at the Embassy of Mexico. I would like to just pinpoint one of the comments that you made, Ambassador Huntley, pertaining to the, how should I say, the better, you stated that global South corporations are better than the northern ones. And considering the shift in our geopolitical situation recently, would you consider, is it because that they're using levers of soft power, for example, education and healthcare? Would you consider that the reason for Global South cooperation to be better than the northern ones?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that, as I said earlier, the conditions under which you get that kind of cooperation and assistance, those conditions are better than what you get, what we have been getting, particularly in recent times from the North. But at the same time, even from a cultural point of view, those relations are better because we are dealing with, let's take our move to Africa. Very ignorant of what happens in Africa. Of course, we know why from our colonial traditions. So that from even that point of view, it is better to have relations with those countries that are closer to us, that are our brothers and sisters, and more than just being brothers and sisters, human beings. They are, in fact, our brothers and sisters.
So if I understand correctly, it is to essentially have a bridge, a cultural bridge, and in that way.
On this question?
All right. Thing is, I have difficulty in hearing, what is being said. So I have difficulty in following the question. I heard she said something to do with the geopolitical situation. I assume its impact at this point in time in terms of whether it does hinder the process of consolidating South-South cooperation. I'm not sure that is in fact what she was asking. Maybe I should be assisted in that regard. Could somebody kind of summarize the question she asked, please?
The query was as to whether the aid from the Global South is preferential because of the use of soft power in terms of education, scholarships, and that type of assistance. As
a fundamental prerequisite for development. That goes without saying. And that is why, the measure of that value is so critical. If you apply this to St. Lucia, for example, to the extent that we can actually foster, right, the education development of our people, the likelihood of our continuous sustainable development becomes more and more manifest. I think this is for us a critical consideration. That is why the policy pursued by our current government of making sure that at least in every household there is a graduate, cannot be emphasized. If we are serious about our development, we must be equally serious about the development of our people, the education of our people, the serious about organization of our people, creating the opportunities and the conditions or the enabling environment for them to do business, for them to grow and use their initiatives. And I'm saying that the relationship we have with other countries, in the South, right, is very, very critical because we have similar experiences and a lot of the experiences can be applied or adopted to our condition. I can use, for example, in the Cuban experience, because Cuba is, for all intents and purposes, our diplomatic hub. There are more than 122 resident embassies in Cuba, and of course some international organizations. And so there are a lot of what we refer to as caucuses, right? We have a CARICOM caucus made up of 14 heads of mission from the Caribbean. We have an African caucus, an Asian caucus, European caucus, Latin American caucus, and a Caribbean Latin American caucus. And from the Caribbean standpoint, from the CARICOM standpoint, what we did was to develop a kind of a strategic framework that governs how we as a group relate to the other caucuses and relate, of course, to the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of building the relationships that allows us to gravitate to opportunities that may be presented. And so we would have had joint activities with the African caucus. We would have had attended and participated in all the activities, as many as possible. We would have had engagement, right, whether it's bilateral or otherwise, or as a group, to seek to identify areas at which we can exchange, areas at which we can support each other, in terms of business, in terms of international participation, in terms of candidature support, and so, this approach, right, is, to my mind, fundamental as the approach at the local level, where we need to create the opportunities for our people to grow, our people to acquire the required level of education necessary, that the opportunities for business, entrepreneurial development, the opportunities for farmers to actually apply new technology, etc., becomes fundamental. And so, one of the things that, for example, I'm pursuing with the Cuban authorities right now is an approach where we actually building a platform for trade, where we have an existing, what we refer to as a standing committee in St. Lucia, made up on a number of agencies, including the Ministry of Commerce, of course, headed by the Ministry of Commerce, including Export St. Lucia, and we have a parallel standing committee developed in Cuba, where we are actually going to start to exchange, right, virtually, identifying the opportunities that exist in both countries, identifying the challenges and obstacles that may impede or that may not facilitate readily the process of engagement and the process of creating the conditions to the business. Once we can identify those challenges, we can effect solutions, identify the solutions and propose the solutions, and get involved with our partners who would be the business persons to basically create the best possible condition for Cuban authorities, Cuban business persons, Cuban state entities, right, and St. Lucian business partners to actually create, right, the condition and participate in a process that allows for real business exchange. We have a traditional relationship that is based fundamentally on solidarity, because, of course, Cuba has been hindered by the embargo in terms of doing business outside of the environment, the Cuban, Latin American environment to a large extent. But the point is that there is now the possibility and the need to do business, right, in a more strategic way, which is what we are pursuing. So that, in a nutshell, I think, right, it is the right approach, both at the national level, at the regional level, international level, when we look at, focusing on South-South cooperation as a fundamental strategic mechanism for fostering our sustainable development. Because, like I said, history has proven otherwise, that, we can't depend on the developed world that has traditionally exploited our resources and would continue to do that as long as we facilitate and allow them to do so.
Thank you for that response, Ambassador Isaac. I believe there was one more question from the floor. So as he's coming up, I'd like to point out Joy was a former intern at the Ministry of External Affairs, and the gentleman in front of you was also an intern at the Ministry of External Affairs.
Good afternoon. My question is, I have a two-part question. Earlier it was mentioned that St. Lucia is trying to stray away from dependency on traditional nations. So my question is, how exactly does St. Lucia and also the people of St. Lucia benefit from this partnership with Nigeria? Second part is there a time span to see the fruits of this partnership? Should we expect like a time?
Thank you very much for the question. We have signaled the government of St. Lucia our intention to establish, relations we have. I think coming out of an outcome of that visit was the signing of an MOU where we intend to cooperate on priority areas. I think the areas are creative industries, education, culture, and so on. And in turn, it's a partnership. We cooperate with each other, we share our best practices, lessons learned, and so on. And the point was made regarding the value of South-South cooperation. And this is a clear example where we have relations with Nigeria. We've recognized that we share the same vulnerabilities. And so we've taken the bold move to reach out and establish relations, and we both benefit. It's a mutual benefit, as opposed to the cooperation that we've had with the North-South, where it was a donor-recipient relationship. They give, we receive. But with the South-South, we benefit. There's a mutual benefit. That's one of the values of the South-South cooperation. I wanted to add that we speak about how valuable and how important it is for us to share relations and cooperation with our partners in the global South. But we also have to be mindful that we should not over-rely on South-South cooperation. We have to admit we still need our partners in the North. We have food products and services to export. We do that to the North, not just South-South. Yeah? So while we speak about the value of South-South cooperation, we should not look at it as a substitute for North-South cooperation, but rather to complement North-South cooperation.
Quickly, there is in fact a St. Lucia delegation in Nigeria at the moment for their Fashion Week, which comes out of that visit. Well, no, there's no particular timeline. It'll develop. It'll emerge with time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're moving into our third segment, where we'll be looking at St. Lucia's diaspora as an untapped resource. When we speak of diversifying development cooperation and exploring new partnerships, our minds tend to gravitate toward engagement with countries or even private enterprises and sometimes even non-governmental organizations. Now, it's important to note that where domestic human resource falters, the diaspora has proven to be an untapped goldmine for talent, experience, and potential. Countries like India and the Philippines, with large diasporas that rival the size of small nations, have weaponized their overseas citizens into a tool for achieving what were once considered unattainable development ambitions. In countries with limited physical resources, the role of the individual, the citizen, in the actualization of the development agenda can never be overstated. In small island developing states such as St. Lucia, where migration and brain drain can pose a significant threat to the country's ability to attain its full development potential, the engagement of the diaspora is critical. So I direct my next question to Ambassador Dubois. Ambassador, what is the role of the St. Lucian diaspora in the development nexus, and how can their contributions help us navigate the changes in the geopolitical environment?
Yeah, thanks much, Mrs. Brown. Let me take the opportunity first to congratulate the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council for yet another year of celebration. Mrs. Montut and your team, you're doing a great job. The St. Lucian diaspora plays a critical and multifaceted role in the country's development nexus. Their contributions go far beyond simple financial remittances and extend into various social, economic, and political spheres. I would first like to break up our topic into two and look at the role of the diaspora in the development nexus. Firstly, the government of St. Lucia has increasingly recognized the diaspora as a strategic asset for national development. This is evident in the adoption of a national diaspora policy which guides national engagement with our nationals, wherever they may have roamed. The establishment of a diaspora affairs office headed by an ambassador, and most recently, in June 2024, the extension of citizenship provisions to include the grandchildren of nationals born outside of St. Lucia. For us, the diaspora is a critical pillar of our national development ethos. Having said this, the key roles of the diaspora would include, well, economic contributions, such as remittances. And this is the most direct and widely recognized contribution. Remittances from St. Lucians living abroad provide crucial financial support to families, improving their living standards and access to essential services like healthcare and education. The World Bank reported that in 2024, remittances contributed to our national GDP was 2.5%, and that is significant. Another economic factor, foreign direct investment. The government actively seeks to attract the diaspora as a source of investment in various sectors, including tourism, real estate, and manufacturing. Initiatives like the proposed diaspora bill aim to incentivize these investments with benefits such as duty-free exemptions. Trade and export. The diaspora creates a demand for St. Lucian products in their host countries, helping to boost exports and support local industries such as re-energizing of the banana market in the UK. It is not unusual to see Baron Foods products on the average supermarket shelf in the US and the UK. Recently, walking along the streets of New York, it was surprising and pleasing to see St. Lucia's Opicon Simos on display for sale by a vendor on the 125th Street in Harlem. And we look at the human and social capital, skills and knowledge transfer. The diaspora represents a vast pool of skilled professionals, entrepreneurs, and academics. In 2023, we conducted a skills mapping exercise of our nationals in the UK with the support of the International Center for Diaspora Policy Development and funding from the European Union Diaspora Fund, to create a database of these individuals with the aim of harnessing their expertise for capacity building and participation in development initiatives. Inspiration and mentorship. These achievements of St. Lucians abroad serve as a source of inspiration for our youth at home. We are endeavoring to host events to bring accomplished diaspora members and their associates back to share their knowledge and experiences. For example, there's the World Congress on Ethnic and Racial Health Disparities, hosted by the Cato T. Lawrenson Institute for Regenerative Engineering based at the University of Connecticut. You know, this is an activity that has been hosted once before, and it's intended that it's going to be held annually, and planning is pretty advanced with hosting it again in January of 2026. Cato Lawrenson is an accomplished St. Lucian, and we're working closely with him with regards to supporting development initiatives. Here, philanthropy and community support. Diaspora organizations and individuals frequently engage in philanthropic activities, providing support to their home communities, especially in times of crises like natural disasters or the COVID-19 epidemic. Support to schools and the less privileged. Many overseas-based St. Lucian organizations and individuals continue to assist the less privileged here. And we look at cultural and political linkages. Cultural ambassadors. The diaspora acts as cultural ambassadors, promoting St. Lucian heritage, cuisine, tourism in their host countries. Programs like the St. Lucia Tourism Authority's Lucian Links are designed to keep the diaspora connected to their homeland. Further, the celebration of our national festivals in the diaspora is unrivaled. La Rose in Cayenne and New York, Journée Creole all over the US and the UK. And lobbying and advocacy. In their host countries, the diaspora can serve as a lobbying force, advocating for policies that benefit St. Lucia and raising the awareness about national issues. And now I look at the second phase of our topic here, navigating challenges in the geopolitical environment. The contributions of the St. Lucian diaspora are particularly valuable in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Here's how their role can help St. Lucia navigate these shifts. Economic diversification and resilience. With global economic fluctuations and potential shifts in trade agreements, relying heavily on a single industry like tourism can be very risky. The diaspora's investments and entrepreneurial activities help to diversify the economy and build resilience against external shocks. The ability to create new markets for St. Lucian exports also reduces the country's dependence on traditional trade partners. Climate change and environmental diplomacy. As a small island developing state, St. Lucia is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Diaspora members with expertise in environmental science, engineering, and policy can provide valuable insights and technical assistance. Furthermore, diaspora professionals working in international organizations or governments can help to amplify St. Lucia's voice on the global stage, advocating for Catch 2023, becoming the first person from the Caribbean to serve on that group. Strengthening diplomatic ties and soft power. The diaspora acts as a bridge between St. Lucia and its host countries. Their presence and contributions can foster stronger diplomatic relations, and their successes in business, academia, and the arts enhance St. Lucia's international reputation and soft power. In an era of shifting alliances and growing geopolitical competition, these people-to-people connections are more important than ever. Humanitarian and crisis response. In a world with increasing natural disasters and global health crises, a well-organized and engaged diaspora can provide a rapid and effective response. The ability to mobilize resources, send aid, and advocate for the homeland can be a critical lifeline in times of emergency, circumventing bureaucratic hurdles and providing direct support to those in need. In essence, by strategically engaging our diaspora, St. Lucia can leverage a powerful, dispersed network of expertise, capital, and influence. This not only fuels national development, but also provides a dynamic and adaptable asset for navigating the complexities and challenges of the modern geopolitical environment. For us, the challenge is effectively tapping into this abundance of resources. We have been reaching out and endeavoring to engage our people, however, with much difficulty in some cases. Our aim is to ultimately get our diaspora to function as a team of professionals serving as one of the pillars of our national development. We are convinced that the foreign direct investment that we seek exists among our diaspora.
So panelists, if you will indulge me, in the interest of time, I would like to ascertain whether or not there are any questions from the floor. Any questions? Okay, so at this point, panelists, I will invite you to chime in, but I would be grateful if you keep your contributions to under 2 minutes, please. Okay, no comments. So at this point, we'll be going into our final segment, a balancing act, maintaining relations with traditional partners while courting new ones. Often, when we at External Affairs state that our strategic priority is greater South-South cooperation, or when we say that we are aiming to forge alliances with non-traditional partners, there is always a query or a question as to whether this means we are no longer actively pursuing cooperation with our traditional allies, such as the USA or the UK. Our standard response is that this decision to forge new alliances is in no way detrimental to our existing relations. As an independent state, a sovereign state, we reserve the right to pursue our diplomatic relations in a manner that is in alignment with our foreign policy priorities. We will engage new partners on our terms without becoming unduly antagonistic to our traditional partners. If anything, it can be said that we make a concerted effort to ensure that existing partnerships and alliances continue to evolve to meet our development needs. One example is our engagement with the United Kingdom through the Economic Partnership Agreement, or the EPA. So my next question is for Ms. Louis. Ms. Louis, can you tell us how have agreements such as the EPA evolved to meet the new realities such as climate change and limited access to concessional financing that St. Lucia has to contend with?
Thank you for the question. And I'm sure in my earlier interventions I've alluded to how we use the EPA or leverage the EPA to ensure that the cooperation that we receive from our partners in the North aligns with our own priorities. The EPA itself, the Economic Partnership Agreement, St. Lucia has signed with the European Union as well as the United Kingdom. The European Union is March of 2019. It's a trade and development agreement, and there are specific articles and provisions dedicated to development cooperation because the parties recognize that we would need cooperation to implement that agreement effectively. The nature of that cooperation and the priorities for cooperation would be discussed between the parties. And yes, the EPA has, it provides a platform where that dialogue and that discussion can take place. How it has evolved, the early years of implementation, the discussion surrounded, compliance of the provisions and how we implement effectively. But as the changing shift in the geopolitical arena, the effect of climate change, the recognition that climate resilience is a significant factor for trade competitiveness, the discussion has evolved. And the matters on the table now are focused on how best we can secure international cooperation or support technical assistance and so on from our partners that has an impact on our economic development. And so we recognize the importance of the climate change dimension and how it has forced us to now focus our discussion on climate resilience as a part of our trade competitiveness. The financing challenge still exists, notwithstanding. Of course, you mentioned the loss of concessional financing, and that is due mainly to the fact that St. Lucia and a number of other SIDS, small island developing states, have now been categorized as middle-income countries. But I dare say middle-income countries on paper because the vulnerabilities still exist. We are still exposed to the climatic shocks, the hurricanes, and so on. And so vulnerability, we are also trying, not just with our donor partners, but at the multinational level, to ensure that vulnerability is part of the criteria for the type of development cooperation that we receive from our partners who are parties to the Economic Partnership Agreement. The development cooperation with the EU is more advanced. Of course, again, we keep mentioning the change in the geopolitical landscape. It has forced our partners in the North to revisit their own priorities. And so, particularly with the European Union, they have had to revisit, change policies, the concessional financing that we were privy to in the past and that the European Development Fund no longer exists. They now have a new financing instrument, the National Development and International Cooperation Instrument, or NDC for short. But in that arrangement, they've recognized and their priorities have aligned with ours in that they have paid attention to the importance of climate resilience. And so the partnerships that we have under the NDC, there are 3 of them that we have access to. The Partnership for Green Deal, the Partnership for Economic Resilience and Trade, and the Partnership for Governance, Security, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. But yes, the EU has recognized the importance of climate change and its impact on the trade competitiveness of our region. We continue to advocate, and there are embedded in the agreement platforms that allow for dialogue at the technical level and at the political level. Our support from the United Kingdom, of course, the implementation of that agreement is still in its infant stage, and so the parties are discussing what our development priorities are. We are aware that the UK now has a trade strategy, and we are now looking at it to see how best we can ensure that our own priorities are recognized and we're able to get meaningful cooperation that allows us to implement the EPA. So yes, the EPA has evolved with the changing times, and we are ensuring that the development support that we have, objectives of the EPA is regional integration. It's an objective, and there's also a separate article on regional integration. And that signals to us the importance that the parties have placed on cooperation among us in the region. And regional integration itself is a component of South-South cooperation. And so the EPA, in that way, facilitates South-South cooperation. And we have concrete examples of cooperation with our partners. We have the OECS, we have CELAC, we mentioned medical diplomacy with Cuba, and so on. So I know we're short on time, so I will stop here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Louis. We are pretty much out of time. So any burning questions you have, feel free to direct them to the panelists later this evening. So to summarize, we would have looked at the evolution of St. Lucian foreign policy from 1979 to the present. We would have gotten a peek into the importance of South-South cooperation in ensuring the attainment of our domestic priorities. And of course, we learned that we must make a conscious effort to decolonize the existing institutions and ideological frameworks surrounding our foreign policy. Ambassador Dubois touched on the potential of the diaspora and highlighted a few of the upcoming initiatives. And Ms. Louis, though she was rushed, I apologize, highlighted the importance of maintaining relations with traditional partners. So at this point, I would like to bring our panel discussion to its logical conclusion. Thank you for your attentiveness. So I'd be grateful if you could give our panelists a round of applause, please. So thank you to you all, and thank you to Ambassador Isaac in Cuba. Okay, thank you. So before we leave, remember I gave Maria a little task. I think we're off air now, right? We had tasked Maria with preparing 3 questions for which we'll be giving out some gifts. So I hope everybody was paying very, very close attention. So the first question, can you name 3 of St. Lucia's traditional development partners? We would have mentioned a few countries. Which countries are St. Lucia's traditional development partners?
Tourism contributes significantly to the economy of St. Lucia.
3 are too many. Can anybody name 2?
Over 40% of the gross domestic product.
Good afternoon. Firstly, I would say United States of America and Canada.
Oh, that is correct. Give him a round of applause. So we have Maria come in with your goodie bag. We're going to ask our permanent secretary. Yes. So the next question. When we were discussing South-South cooperation with non-traditional partners, can you name 3 non-traditional partners that St. Lucia has been engaging?
All right. So China, Taiwan, and Brazil.
Try again.
Okay, tell me which one was wrong then.
China.
Okay, so we have Taiwan because we're no longer doing cooperation with China. Is that it? Okay, so Brazil, yeah. And Nigeria.
Correct, yes.
Yippee!
Yes. So Maria, you can present the bag kindly. Or if you cannot give the exact periods, you can come and describe the different periods in St. Lucia's foreign policy history. You have it? Come, let's go.
Sorry, too vertically challenged there. Okay, you know what? Is it the Cold followed by Cold War? No, post independence. Yeah, I think I should volunteer one of my.
Don't worry, my girl, we'll give you a gift for efforts. Good try. Yes, Ambassador Huntley, can you just give them a quick reminder of the different periods?
Okay, the different periods, the first one, 1997 to 2007, which I called No Posturing on the International Stage. We didn't. The second one was the China Factor, 97 to 2007. And the third one is the current, expanding our diplomatic relations.
Okay. And the final question is for affairs units. Think. You would have mentioned a few areas. Okay, no guesses. So I have another question then. You have, okay, come. You can go ahead, Ayodele. So Ayodele will answer and give a lucky student her gift. Yes. That is correct. Ayodele wants a gift, please. Okay, thank you. So this brings us to the end of the first segment. So for the next segment of External Affairs event, I would like everybody to pay attention to some instructions I'm going to give you. So everybody can see Michelle in the back. Michelle, can you raise your hands, please? Michelle will be giving everybody visiting the exhibition a passport and a boarding pass. Okay? Your passport has 5 different zones representing the 5 different units represented at the back. As you visit each zone, you will get a sticker or an endorsement. Now, at the end of your visiting all of the zones, you are entitled to a gift. But you must have an endorsement from every zone. So that means you must pay attention in every zone. After that,